They thought the war would be quick, that it would be over before the end of the year, that they would march in, fight with honor, and return home as heroes, welcomed by their families and remembered for their courage. But what they found instead was something far darker, something they could have never imagined, a place where time seemed to stop, where hope slowly disappeared, and where every single day felt like a fight, not for victory, but simply to stay alive. Because this was not the war they had been promised. This was something else entirely, something that would change them forever. This was life in the trenches. Across the Western Front, a long and broken line stretched for hundreds of kilometers, cutting through fields, forests, and villages, transforming once peaceful landscapes into a scar of mud and destruction, where two massive armies faced each other from a distance that was often shorter than a football field, separated by a deadly space known as no man's land, and unable to advance without suffering unimaginable losses. Both sides dug into the earth, building deep trench systems that became the center of this new kind of war. A war that did not move, a war that trapped men in place for months, sometimes years. The trenches were not simple holes in the ground. They were complex systems with front lines, support lines, and communication trenches connecting everything together, reinforced with wood, sandbags, and whatever material soldiers could find. But no matter how much effort was put into building them, they could never protect against everything, especially the rain, which turned the trenches into rivers of thick mud, making it difficult to move, to sleep, even to stand, as soldiers struggled to keep their balance while carrying heavy equipment, their boots sinking into the ground with every step. Water was a constant enemy, filling the trenches without warning, soaking uniforms, freezing bodies, and creating the perfect conditions for disease. And one of the most common and painful conditions was trench foot, caused by standing in cold, wet conditions for too long, turning feet swollen, numb, and infected, sometimes so severe that amputation became necessary. A reminder that even without enemy fire, the trenches themselves could destroy a man. The smell inside the trenches was overwhelming, something that no one could truly get used to, a mixture of mud, sweat, gunpowder, and decay. Because death was always present, bodies buried too close, or sometimes not buried at all, slowly decomposing and blending into the earth, creating an atmosphere that was both physical and psychological, a constant reminder that survival was temporary, and that at any moment anyone could become part of that same ground. Rats thrived in these conditions, growing large and fearless, feeding on whatever they could find, especially the remains of fallen soldiers, multiplying quickly and invading every corner of the trenches, running across supplies, weapons, and even sleeping men, while lice spread through uniforms, causing endless itching, infections, and discomfort, turning even the smallest moments into a struggle, as there was no escape from these constant invasions. But beyond the physical suffering, it was the mental pressure that truly broke many soldiers. The feeling of being trapped, of being watched, of knowing that danger could come at any second. As the sound of artillery never stopped, explosions echoing day and night, shaking the ground beneath them, making rest almost impossible, and creating a state of constant tension where the mind could never fully relax, where fear became a permanent part of life. When the order to attack came, everything changed in an instant as soldiers climbed out of the trenches and into no man's land, stepping into a space that was designed for death, filled with barbed wire, deep craters, and the bodies of those who had tried before them. And as they moved forward, machine guns opened fire, cutting through lines of men in seconds, turning organized attacks into chaos as soldiers fell one after another, often without even seeing the enemy they were fighting. Many knew that these attacks had little chance of success, that they were being sent into near certain death, but orders were orders, and disobedience was not an option. And so they went forward, driven by duty, fear, or simply the hope of surviving just a little bit longer, even as everything around them suggested otherwise.
The losses were devastating. Entire units could disappear in a matter of minutes, leaving behind nothing but silence and bodies in the mud. And yet, the next day, it would happen again. Another attack, another wave, another group of men sent into the same deadly space, continuing a cycle that seemed endless, a cycle where progress was measured in meters, but lives were lost in thousands. Sleep offered no escape, as soldiers rested in cramped, uncomfortable spaces, surrounded by noise and danger, often waking suddenly to the sound of explosions or the cries of the wounded. And even in moments of quiet, their minds remained active, replaying the horrors they had witnessed, creating a form of exhaustion that was both physical and mental, slowly wearing them down over time. Letters from home became one of the few connections to a world that felt increasingly distant. Words from family and loved ones bringing moments of comfort, reminding them of life before the war, of who they used to be, and giving them a reason to keep going, even when everything around them seemed hopeless, even when the future felt uncertain and far away. But as time passed, even that hope began to fade for many, replaced by a sense of numbness, a way of protecting the mind from the constant stress and fear, as soldiers adapted to their environment, not because it became easier, but because they had no other choice, because survival required it. And then came the new weapons, adding even more terror to an already unbearable situation. Poison gas drifting silently across the battlefield, forcing soldiers to react instantly or suffer a slow and painful death. Artillery becoming more powerful and more accurate, capable of destroying entire sections of trench in seconds, and the introduction of tanks and aircraft changing the nature of warfare, making it more unpredictable, more destructive, and even more terrifying. Despite all of this, soldiers continued to endure, holding their positions, following orders, and facing each new day with the same uncertainty, the same fear, the same question in their minds. Would they survive, or would they become just another name lost in the chaos of war? Life in the trenches was not about strategy or politics. It was about survival in its most basic form, about enduring conditions that push the limits of the human body and mind, about finding small moments of strength in a place that offered almost none, and about holding on, even when everything seemed hopeless, even when the future felt uncertain and far away. And for those who survived, the war never truly ended, because the trenches stayed with them, in their memories, in their dreams, in the silence that followed them long after the fighting stopped, a